Hello, guys. Today we will be learning about poverty, and this topic is a little big topic. So, for that, I have divided the videos in part 1, 2, and I will cover it in two parts. So, first of all, we will study the basic of poverty and what is poverty and types and the measurement of poverty. Okay, so let's start it. Okay, now first let's know about what is poverty. So, poverty, as you may be knowing, that poverty is a situation in which a person or a section of society is unable to meet basic necessities of life, that is, deprivation from basic amenities. When such case arises, then we uh, term that situation as poverty, and that is the condition for poverty. Okay, now let's talk about the types of poverty. So there are two types of poverty. One is absolute poverty and the another is relative poverty. So absolute poverty refers to that poverty where there is deprivation from basic amenities. It is expressed in relation to poverty line. When we say about absolute poverty, then we express it in relation to the poverty line, and it is deprivation from basic amenities. That is why we are saying it as absolute poverty. Okay, now the next one is the relative poverty, and this relative poverty is expressed in relation to the income or expenditure levels of various section of society. So as it is expressed in terms of income and expenditure levels, so ultimately it is measuring the inequality. It is measuring the inequalities present in the society. So we can say it in terms of the inequality. We can relate it to the inequality. Okay, so so the main thing that we need to keep in mind is that absolute poverty is expressed in relation to the poverty line, and the relative poverty measures the inequality. Okay, now let's and also for giving you a clear perception about the difference between these two, for example, I will take an example. Let's consider that the absolute, as you may be knowing, that the underdeveloped countries have high absolute poverty because they have very less things present for them, and they are deprived from basic amenities, while in case of developed countries the absolute poverty is very low because they have enough things for their basic for meeting their basic requirement, so their absolute poverty is very low. While in case of the relative poverty, the underdeveloped countries have high relative poverty because there is huge inequality, and in case of the developed countries there is also high relative poverty but moderately high, and there is existence of inequality in case of developed country also. That's why the relative poverty is high in both developed countries and underdeveloped countries. Okay, that was just an example, and let's move to the another part, and that is your measurement of poverty. Okay, now in this you can see that there is mention, the number one is your poverty ratio, or we this poverty ratio is also known as the head count ratio. This is the way through which we can measure the poverty. So in the poverty ratio you can see that this you can see the formula of poverty ratio as the number of poor upon the total population into 100. Here we are calculating the percentage of poor that are present amongst the whole population, and when we are doing it, for example 21.9, this is the data. Okay, this poverty ratio is also known as your head count ratio. It is represented by the symbol H, and also ultimately what it does is that it measures the extent or magnitude of poverty. What it does is that it measures the extent or magnitude of poverty. Okay, this was the first method for the measurement of poverty. Now let us see the second one. So the second one is this poverty gap index. This poverty gap index, as you can see the formula of this poverty gap index, the formula is that poverty line minus the average income of poor upon the poverty line. For example, if we consider that the poverty line has value of 10 and also the average income of poor is 6, this is just an example, then the formula will be like 10 minus 6 upon 10, 4 by 10, that is 0.4, and in percentage we will multiply it by 100 and it will come as 40%. So it is what it is doing is that it is measuring the severity of poverty, severity, or we can say intensity. So what we can conclude is that earlier the poverty ratio was measuring the extent or magnitude of poverty, while this poverty gap index is measuring the severity of poverty. There is a difference. Okay, we should keep this in mind. Okay, now let's move to the third one. This is the third one. You can see this is squared poverty gap index. The earlier one was poverty gap index and this is squared poverty gap index. Here in the formula you can see that what we are doing in this formula is that we are squaring the poverty gap indices. This is the first one, this is the second one, and it will continue up to n, and we are taking the mean. That's why we are dividing it by the value of n, and n is the number of poors. Okay, so squared poverty gap index is the mean of squared individual poverty gap indexes that we already studied. Okay, so ultimately what it does, it measures the intensity or severity of poverty, and but the difference here is that it also take into consideration the inequality among the poor. Okay, the inequality amongst the poor means that some poor are extremely poor and some poor are not that much poor, so we are taking this kind of inequality also into consideration. So this is the squared poverty gap index. Okay, after this we will talk about the last one. The last one is your sane index of poverty. The sane index of poverty is the most important one, and it was provided by the Professor Amartya Kumar Sen, and that's why it is known as sane index of poverty. And you can see here the formula of this sane index of poverty. The formula is S is equals to H inside the bracket I plus 1 minus I into G, close the bracket. So here the S is for standing for the sane index, and this H here is your head count ratio or the poverty ratio that we already talked about, the first method, and this I here stands for the poverty gap index, the second one, and the G here stands for the Gini coefficient. Okay, so what is the sane index of poverty? It is the composite measure or index of poverty which measures the extent and severity of poverty, taking into consideration the inequality also. So here you will realize that it is telling you about the extent also, severity also, and also it is taking into consideration the inequality. Ultimately it is summing all the things that we already studied. So it is the most suitable we can say index that we can use for measuring the poverty. So these were the indexes for the measurement of the poverty, and for this video I will sum up here only, and the further details and the committees that are involved for measuring of poverty and all of those things will be discussed in the next video, and after that we will go in some more detail also. So thank you for your time, and have a nice day.